is Sharon Sugarman. And I'd also very much like to introduce our guest speaker, Jeff Russo from Hubspot.
Thanks, Trevor.
We're honored to have you, Jeff, on the call. Jeff is based in Boston, and he's been with HubSpot for 9 years, and he's the director of product go-to-market for Sales Hub. And he's got years and years of expertise spanning marketing, sales, and customer success. So, Jeff, we're really, really excited to spend some time with you. Thanks so much for being on this session with us. Thank you all for joining us. We've been very excited about this for some time because it's definitely a challenge that all organizations are facing now, and having had a sneak peek of the content, I'm sure you're all going to find tremendous value in it. So before we start, just a little bit of housekeeping. You're more than welcome to share questions in the chat pane as we go. We'll answer those, and where necessary, Jeff can stop and answer too. At the end, there'll also be an opportunity to ask questions. And we're going to record the session. So afterwards, we'll share that with you together with a lot of the resources that Jeff's also going to spend some time showing you in the slide deck. Before I start, if I can just ask, is there anybody who has any reservations for us recording the session, or can we go ahead and do that? Okay, nothing. That's all cool. Great. Well, without further ado, we're going to hand over the control to you, Jeff, and we look forward to your session.
Yeah, no, thank you so much, Trevor, and really excited to be joining today. So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen and just give me a shout if we aren't able to see. I think everybody can see that I have the deck pulled up, right? Great. Yeah, so I'm Jeff, really excited to be joining today. You know, Trevor had reached out a few weeks back and mentioned that I think he's seen some folks on my team talk a little bit about frictionless selling, the concept that we're going to talk about today, and some other folks just talking a little bit more generally about how we think about CRM, sales software, best practices, some of the things that we're going to cover today. So that's kind of how we all got linked up, and excited, like I said, to step through things. So Trevor already said this. I'll just give you a little bit of quick background on myself. As you heard a minute ago, I've been at HubSpot for a good chunk of time. I've spent time in our services organization, working in our sales org, in marketing, and most recently, I'm in the product org working specifically on our sales platform. So our CRM offering and some of the sales acceleration tools that we build and that are a part of the platform, and that you'll get a little bit of a look at today. So just quick bit of additional detail on the talk. You know, this talk is really designed to be for sales leaders, salespeople, really anyone who cares about improving the practice of selling at their company. And, you know, my goal and sort of our broader mission at HubSpot is really to help our users, customers, just people out practicing this in the market really thrive. So I'm going to talk a little bit about how we think about approaching sales in 2020 and this practice that I mentioned a minute ago that we call frictionless selling. So I can't see many of you, but I'm guessing that a lot of you in the past, I usually do this as a poll when it's a live room, but I'm guessing that many of you in the past have bought a car. And if you think about that experience of buying a car, that's a relatively big, important purchase. Definitely not a purchase that you make day to day. You know, you're probably going to keep a car for a while. You need to maintain it. It's a pretty big purchase price. It's something you're maybe going to climb into to drive to work every morning when we're not all at home. So, naturally, something that goes into a car purchase is you're going to do a lot of research. These are some of the places that people go here in the States for details on new cars. You might have some different spots that you go to do some online research, but you think about that process, you're typically maybe doing some research on the manufacturer, maybe the model you're looking at, really trying to even maybe understand the experience that people have had in the past at the dealership that you might plan to buy from. Lots of research and sort of an in-depth process that you go through when you're making one of these big ticket purchases. And eventually, you make your way to a showroom to check it out. You're going to talk to a dealer, maybe take a test drive or two, really kind of get to know the product. You sit down, you meet with the salesperson, you get their business card. Maybe you even go to another dealership, as I did the last time I was buying a car, meet with another salesperson. Overall, this process is pretty long. It's pretty drawn out. But you could argue that this process for something like a car really kind of makes sense, at least to some extent. You have questions, you need answers. It's really a considered purchase, and you want to be really thoughtful about that process. So I'm guessing that's not a surprise to anyone. That's probably something that, like I said, many of you have been through yourselves. Now, I want you to imagine for a minute, if you were to go through this same process every time you had to buy something like, let's say, a toothbrush. You'd be sort of WTFing all over the place, right? Who wants to buy a toothbrush from a salesperson? Who wants to invest so much time and energy into buying something that's a lot smaller? That would be super weird. But that same sales process, that long sort of drawn out process, really does work when you're buying something like a car. And here's kind of why we kind of try to draw the contrast between these two things and why we think there's that difference. And that is really that when you think about great buying experiences, those typically only come when you have really had the way you want to buy matched by the company that's selling. Or if you think of yourself in the position that many of us are in on the selling side, really the way we can give our prospects, our buyers, our customers a great experience is by matching their expectations throughout that purchase process and that purchase experience. So that's oftentimes not a hugely surprising thing when we say it, but I think it's an important thing to kind of think about, and you'll see why that's important as we get into things. But if you think for a minute also about the history of how we've sold things and bought things over the course of time all over the world, you can kind of see how we've gotten here. In the early days, we bartered for things. So if you think about the silk trade, gosh, there was so much friction in trying to match up what someone had to offer and what we wanted to get our hands on, and finding the right people and not having money to facilitate that transaction. And then we like to say, a bunch of stuff happened in history over time. And then we've kind of gotten to a place where today we can buy all sorts of things right from the comfort of our homes, right from our couch, which is great, especially right now. So the point we try to kind of draw out here is that over the entire history of sales, there's really been this kind of march toward one thing, and that is convenience. So bartering obviously wasn't very convenient. Money came along, the internet came along. Now we're in this place today where really a lot of the sellers who do fantastically well, and a lot of the experiences that a lot of us really think about as the ideal, are really, really convenient and frictionless. So everything's kind of moving in this direction of less and less friction, more convenience. These are some good and kind of fun examples that I'd like to talk a little bit about. And some of the brands might be different for all of you, but I'll give you kind of a quick run through. If you think about how we used to buy music, we would go to a physical store and purchase a physical CD or cassette tape or some other kind of media that had the music on it. And then iTunes came along and made that whole process way less sort of friction filled. And if you think even further than that, then Spotify came along and even further made that a really, really easy, convenient, seamless thing to buy. This is a great one. I think this is also a great example of just disruption. You know, here in the States, at least, we had a company called Blockbuster Video, which was a video store, and you would drive down to Blockbuster and hope they had what you wanted to see in stock and pick up the tape off the shelf. And then you might even get charged a fine if you didn't rewind that VHS tape before you returned it. All sorts of friction in that process. Then Netflix came along, and we could all rent DVDs by mail. And now, obviously, you know, streaming services are really dominant. So another place where there's been this kind of march toward convenience. You know, you just think about how we do banking and exchange money today. You know, cash was really the way you did that for so long. And you had to go to an ATM and make sure you had enough cash on hand. And then things like checks came along and transfers. And now, you know, I am more and more in the habit of using something that hasn't been big in the States until pretty recently, but touchless payments. You know, I can just hold my phone up to the terminal when I'm at the grocery store and not have to touch anything, which is really, really seamless. So, you know, I won't keep going here. I think you all get the idea, but there's been this kind of march toward convenience in all sorts of different places in our lives. And while I think, you know, a lot of these are B2C examples and examples of just things that play out in our daily lives, the truth is that if we're in B2B or some kind of a considered purchase space, these affect the way we need to market and sell too, because we are all daily B2C buyers ourselves, right? We're living in a world where things have gotten more and more convenient. We have that expectation, and we look for that when we're making a purchase, whether it's for ourselves in our own lives, or if it's in a B2B context, if we're buying something for our business. So really, you know, a trend that I think holds up regardless of what industry you're in, what space you're in, whether it's B2B or B2C. This is really kind of universal. So I love a good 2x2, and this is a good one. Want to talk a little bit about the ideal sales motion for a product or service. And I think that depends on two things. One is price, and the other is kind of change to the buyer. So a few examples here. Something like a toothbrush, the example I used a couple of minutes ago, that's a really low cost item, right? There's no learning curve there. We all need one. When we need one, we buy one. At the opposite end of the spectrum is something like a car, high in price, pretty high change to the buyer in some cases, especially if you're going out and buying a Tesla or something with self-driving technology. So a new car is pretty different than a toothbrush. In the top left, I think a nice example of something that may not be really expensive, but does involve quite a bit of change for a buyer is something like an Amazon Alexa or a Google Home. And I think Amazon did a really great job of showing us all these use cases, giving us reviews, and making it feel pretty easy to get started with that product, even though it was brand new to many of us a few years back. And then in the bottom right, you know, there are expensive purchases that aren't a really big change. You think about a mattress. Our expectations kind of vary depending on what we're buying is really the point here. And for us at HubSpot, enterprise CRM is a big part of what I think about and what we sell. And I'd ask you to give a little bit of thought to where what you sell might fit on this grid. Cool. So, you know, our HubSpot CEO, Brian Halligan, I don't know if any of you have seen him talk or have seen any of his writing in the past, but he talks a lot about this idea that some of the best companies in the world aren't even product disruptors anymore. Yes, they have a great product, but they're also experience disruptors. They don't just sell a great product. They think about really every element of what it's like to be their customer, to be their buyer, and they really put a lot of effort into making that great. And we really think a lot about how a company needs to behave to do that. And I think the first step is thinking about where you fall on that 2x2 that we saw a minute ago, to really kind of understand and think about what your buyer's expectations are, how you can match them. And the second one is to really kind of exceed those expectations. And I think Tesla is kind of a good example of this. So they're one of those companies that, like I said a couple minutes ago, really falls in that top right quadrant. They've got a high priced item, really high consideration, high change in the purchase if it's your first time buying a Tesla. But at the same time, they've taken as much friction out of that process as possible. So you can buy a Tesla online, which is what you see here. And they have a really generous trial and return policy. So they've tried to make it really easy, despite the fact that there's a lot of change here for a buyer, for someone to take the leap and to get started. So this is another interesting example in the automotive space. I'm not sure if anyone's familiar with these folks. I wasn't until I saw the example here, but Carvana is a company that has been around for, I think, about 6 years. They're already the #1 car dealer here in the Americas, spreading really quickly. They went public, and I think their market cap is over $11 billion. So they're a sudden behemoth in the car sales industry. And a few things that make them different is they have a couple of different ways of buying. So you can literally do everything online. You can look at different makes, models, compare them, tour them right on their website. It's a really good immersive experience. But they also have, and I wish I had a photo of this, you should Google it after if you haven't seen it, but they have a car vending machine in some locations where you can actually go up and pick out a car and it'll be delivered down to you. It's this big, tall, vertical building, which is pretty cool. Thankfully, the vending machines don't accept cash. But the genius behind this, in addition to just the marketing genius that is a car vending machine, is that they've really, again, made this entire process of buying a car frictionless. They do all of the paperwork for you. You don't have to deal with things like registering the car, which is a real pain here, dealing with taxes, really none of that. You pick a day and time, they drop off the car at your house. You have a 7-day money back guarantee if you don't like it. So super simple. There's more and more good examples of this, specifically in the automotive industry, I think, which is a little bit of a space that's kind of going through some changes. So, if we had to sum up a conclusion from this trend I've been talking about, of kind of frictionless, convenient experiences, you might come to the conclusion that it's no longer as much about what you sell. It's really how you sell that can help differentiate you and can help you stand out. At least that's definitely more the case today than I think it once was. Convenience, experience really is always going to win out when two products are at least similar. So the bottom line here is we want as little friction as possible in our buying experience for our clients' customers. So you might have to ask yourself, what does this have to do with your sales team? And a concept that we talk a lot about at HubSpot is this idea of a flywheel. Not sure if anyone's familiar with this. I apologize if this slide is distracting to look at as it spins away, but I'll give you all a very quick primer on this idea. I think if you were to go and walk around on the marketing or the sales floor of any modern office, chances are if you were to look at a whiteboard or if you were to hear people talking, you might hear this idea or see this idea of a funnel come up. We all draw funnels, we talk about them, we think about pouring budget and traffic and maybe leads into the top of the funnel, and hopefully customers come out the other end of the funnel. But our CEO, who has really given a lot of thought to this, often argues that the funnel is kind of a dated concept. And if you think about it, with things like customer referrals and word of mouth being so influential on the purchase process today, the funnel doesn't really account for that, right? It looks like a single linear process. And the idea behind the flywheel is to start kind of using this as a mental model to think about it as more of a closed loop, where if you can do a great job of attracting and engaging and delighting customers through things like word of mouth, through things like the influence that other customers have on what people buy today, you can kind of create this virtuous cycle where your existing customers help to sort of feed that marketing and sales process. So when you start to think about this, yes, it's just a mental model. It's a way of kind of looking at what we do as marketers, salespeople, folks in customer service, but you also start to think about ways to kind of spin that flywheel faster. And there's a couple of ways to do that. You can add force, so do more of what you're doing today, but you can also look for ways to reduce friction, which is what I've kind of been talking about. So, we all want to grow faster, make more money, but we have a lot to learn, I think, from these consumer companies and these examples that I've shown so far. So I want to talk a little bit about some of the lessons that we can apply to our business. Like I said, two things we can do. We can try to find ways to add force, and we can try to find ways to reduce friction. And I think when you talk to sales leaders specifically, sales leaders are great at adding more force. It's really something that comes naturally to sales leaders. But when you think about it, oftentimes finding ways to reduce friction is something that's maybe not as front of mind. And I have some data to back this up. I asked a favor of one of our VPs of sales. She knows a lot of other VPs of sales, apparently, I think 507 to be exact. And we emailed these folks, and we just asked them a really simple question. And that was, what are your top 3 initiatives for the rest of the year? And we didn't give them any other guidance, just wanted to see what they came back to us with. And what do you know, if you look at the outcome of that question, 81%, and you'll see some examples of how we bucketed these in a minute, kind of fit into this idea of adding force. And like I said, my definition of adding force is anything you can construe as just doing more of what you're doing now. So making it better, making it stronger, making it faster. There was some friction reduction in there, but far less. And I think that really speaks to how VPs of sales kind of think and where they tend to gravitate. So there's some examples here. Things like capacity and territory planning, and coming up with a new account expansion strategy, and rolling out a new demo, and trying to find ways to increase ACV, and doing things like incentives for the sales org, and just the good old more activity play. On the reducing friction side, there were some decent examples here. So talk a lot about things like coaching, finding ways to improve productivity, focusing on high value or target accounts, things like that. But I think at the end of the day, and this is a ridiculous image, but I think it sums things up well. Sales really is a discipline of force in a lot of places. Sales has the burden of the whole business on their shoulders. Salespeople are really tasked with and think of themselves as using force, doing more to get ahead. And I think sales teams are definitely getting smarter. We're doing things like cold calling less, or at least making that a little bit less of something that we're totally reliant on. Salespeople are great at building relationships, but salespeople often don't think in terms of removing friction. It's just not something that's in a lot of sales leaders' toolbox. And that's what we want to spend some time thinking about today, is giving you some of those tools to help reduce the amount of friction that's in your sales process. I think this is kind of a nice thing to think about that builds a little bit of urgency, is, trust in sales. And I think this is from a survey that's been done year after year, and it consistently shows the same thing. But trust in sales is really kind of dwindling over time. This is related to a question around when buyers will go to a salesperson for information. And you have to ask yourself, why are salespeople toward the bottom of the list? And I think that's because when you think about adding force, that's usually really a one-way street. Buyers don't really care how quickly we want to move or what our methodology says to do. All this force and us trying to do more, trying to move things faster, can really result in a deterioration of trust. Okay, and if that wasn't bad enough, this is another goofy image, but I think sums it up well, is that, there's an enemy lurking out there, kind of creepily behind the blinds, as you see here. And that enemy is what we've been talking about, this idea of friction. And I think you could argue that friction is really everywhere in sales. And of course, today in the economic climate that we're all in, there's more of it than there has been for a long time. So kind of few hard and fast truths about friction in sales. One, reps only spend about a third of their time actually selling. We do a lot of research on this at Hubspot. It's something that's pretty consistent. We all want our teams to be more efficient, but at the end of the day, there's so much overhead involved in a sales rep's day to day that as you see here, a good chunk of the time that they have is really whittled down to very little time that they actually spend doing what they do best, which is engaging with prospects, engaging with customers. Second thing here, so, we all want buyers to really love that buying experience, but again, buyers don't have a ton of trust in our integrity. We all think about also coaching, and, sales leaders say they coach, but when you talk to end reps, a lot of them say and feel like they really don't get a lot of coaching. So there's clearly a disconnect there as well. So these are all, I think, problems that modern sales leaders should really be thinking about. And this is also what frictionless selling, the idea that we're here to talk about today, is all about, is giving you the tools to fight some of that friction on top of all the things that you're already doing. So I'm going to walk through the framework. Hopefully it's pretty actionable for all of you. Each of the 3 pieces of this framework also has an audit associated with it. We call it a friction table. And you're able to do this yourself. You can take it home with you. We have some kind of PDF versions of what you're going to see. So if you do want to really dig into any of these, it should be easy to do. And in the process, I'll give you some sort of tips that we've come across in the past to help with some of these things. And you'll actually get a look at how we've baked some of this into the product inside of Hubspot. Nice. So the first piece of this is actually probably the one that seems the most obvious, but I think it's really hard. And that is to eliminate the friction from your sales reps' day. So if you talk to reps, if you watch reps working, their day is usually pretty packed. There's a lot of, I think I would say, low value or sometimes meaningless activity that's required of a rep in their day to day. There's a lot of context switching as they're, getting on the phone, talking to people in different buying phases, then being asked to, spend an hour on data entry. So a lot of friction here. And what we kind of tell folks to think about is how they can start with an audit of what their reps day-to-day looks like. And this is literally just making a list of all the top tasks that a rep is going to do during their day. So there's 9 tasks that we've found reps often prioritize. You might find different things when you look at your reps day to day, but feel free to steal this. Again, this is something that you can take away from today's session. We did this as part of a much bigger baseline study of hundreds of salespeople, both at Hubspot and in some of our customers' organizations. And these are sort of the ones that bubbled to the top. So each of these is not, I think, one thing in itself. Each of these has many kind of mini activities, a lot of tools that it takes to do them. And all of those things really add up to friction. You think about just planning your day. That's going to involve your calendar, your to-do list, maybe tasks in your CRM system. So all of these, each of these things really has a lot of overhead that it kind of contributes. So you can probably get the gist of how you think about filling this out. You can come up with some estimations of how much time in the day it takes, how many tools you need to use. And then something just kind of fun that we like to do at HubSpot is we use chilies, like you might see on, a restaurant menu to indicate how spicy something is or how much friction it kind of adds to the process. So once you've done that analysis, you can start to see where there's some opportunities for change. And a couple of, good examples here. I think something that we found when we went through this is in a lot of cases, you find that, there's maybe 5 tools involved in doing something. And those things, not only because of the fact that they involve a lot of tools, but just because they're tough things to do, tend to take a ton of time for a rep. You can start to kind of prioritize which ones you're going to focus in on first. But as you kind of set off on this mission to, cut out a lot of the fat from your reps day to day, there's a few metrics that I think can be helpful to look at. The first one, some of these are obvious, but as you looked at those tasks that are a part of your reps day to day, and as you picked out the ones that are still important, how long did it actually take to accomplish those things before and after? And then as a result, how much of your reps' time is actually left for them to spend the time how they should be spending it, which is actually engaging with prospects, engaging with customers, doing that actual selling. And then, if you nail those 2 things, you really should see that reflected in quota attainment at the end of the day, which is ultimately, obviously, what we care about. So like I said, this is both kind of a practice that we try to talk about, spend a lot of time thinking about and doing ourselves at HubSpot, but we also try, and the team that I work on really tries to spend a lot of time finding new ways to bake this into our tools. And I'm going to go through a few of these. The first is a tool called sequences. So we've introduced some advanced functionality in this tool pretty recently, specifically in our professional and enterprise tiers. So sequences really a tool to help a rep orchestrate and automate parts of their day-to-day. So you can do things from here like send emails, you can schedule tasks for yourself that might happen off in the future. I can schedule things like manual emails if I want to actually remind myself to send something, but I'm going to personalize it or review it ahead of time. You see some other examples here. But a couple of favorites that we've just added, if you have a LinkedIn Sales Navigator subscription, which I know more and more sales teams do, we've actually made it possible to do some things like send InMail and send connection requests right from this automated tool. So as you can imagine, a lot of sales reps have a pretty, standardized prescriptive process they're going to take at certain steps of the sales process. This allows them to automate that, but also get notified, bring something back to the forefront of what they're doing if it needs some kind of intervention. So a big way to, like I said, introduce some automation into a rep's day and help reduce some of the friction in their work. HubSpot also has kind of a cool concept called task queues that I haven't seen in many other systems. So this is almost kind of like a playlist for your to-dos. You can basically set one up and fire off one of these task queues from any task view in HubSpot. And what it does is it'll basically take you through the records that you have tasks set on. So if I maybe had 10 calls lined up, it'll actually take me to those contacts records. It'll initiate the call. It'll ask me to enter some notes, and it will just take me on to the next one. So really making it easy to hop from task to just kind of get in a great flow if I'm going to spend some time doing something specific like writing emails or placing calls or whatever it may be. So a big time saver, a nice way to kind of reduce that context switching for reps. We're adding some cool new features to this, allowing you to do things like share task queues. So we see a lot of managers setting these up and assigning them to their reps and some other things like that. Nice. So I talked a little bit about sequences, which is one of those automation tools that's really for a rep. We have another automation tool in HubSpot called Workflows that's really designed to help you keep your database clean and keep your reps on track. So we often think of using workflows to do things like assign leads or automate other parts of the sales cycle. But in the example that you're going to see here, we're using workflows to basically surface contacts who we think have maybe fallen through the cracks. So looking at contacts who have maybe never been contacted in the past couple of weeks, or even some longer period of time, even if they were maybe marked as sales qualified leads. So workflows lets us do things like maybe send a notification about those records or assign them to a specific rep. So a lot of things that you can do with workflows, and just a great way to, again, reduce some friction, reduce some of the manual work for your reps. And last kind of tip I'm going to hit for simplifying your reps day to day. We have a tool in HubSpot called Playbooks, and Playbooks has this concept that you see here of these question and answer fields. So playbooks basically are sort of like competitive battle cards or resources that you can weave into different parts of the sales process. So you can actually see one here in the context of a contact record. And things you can do with playbooks, you might use playbooks to surface a call script or to remind a rep that they need to ask a particular question at a certain stage of the sales process. And you can tie these to different types of records in HubSpot. You can tie them to different stages of the sales process. Just another way that you can really surface relevant questions, relevant information to reps at really specific points in time. Try to kind of take that out of something that they need to think about. Nice. So we talked about reducing friction for sales reps. I think once you've reduced that friction for your reps, you need to start thinking about some ways of aligning with your buyer's expectations. So we've got a similar matrix here. Again, you'll be able to get your hands on this. Just a quick high level on what you're looking at. Across the top are some of the different roles that people typically take in the sales process. Down the side are some of those different typical stages of a sales process. And what we try to do ourselves, and what we encourage folks to do, is really go out and do a little bit of fact finding to actually fill this in. So interviewing reps, interviewing buyers, looking for places where there's friction for the buyer in the process. And again, prioritizing and deciding where you're going to spend some time. So you might think about, if research is a challenge for a particular sales persona, you might want to invest in creating more content or some of those playbooks that I talked about a minute ago to really make sure that your salespeople are aligning and providing value at that stage. You might want to simplify the process of creating and sharing proposals and make it easy for your buyers to actually sign those proposals and review them online with maybe a proposals tool. And you got to get the idea here. We might weave in e-sign if that's a pain point a little bit further down the process. But just kind of turning the tables, looking at things from the perspective of the buyer, and finding ways to kind of make that journey easier for them as well. Few thoughts here. Again, these are all pretty straightforward, but if you can reduce friction for the buyer, ultimately that should manifest itself in better close rates, better sales velocity, things will start happening faster, and then sort of better metrics just overall on the prospect side. So a few ways that we try to make this easier inside of HubSpot. As Trevor and I were talking before this, he mentioned to me that, ABM, I think, is a popular model that has really kind of come to the forefront in the past few years, especially for folks who are selling into high value account. You really want to make sure, obviously, that these high value accounts have a fantastic frictionless experience. It's really important. And something that we've tried to do more recently in HubSpot is really make it easy for salespeople to have the kind of visibility into an account that they need to provide that. So our new ABM offering has some things that you saw a minute ago, high level metrics on your target accounts, how they are engaging with you, how your company's engaging with them, so you can make sure that there's actually that work being done, but also really sort of deep data on specific accounts. I can see things that can give me some cues about how I can approach those folks. Maybe it's details on whether or not they're visiting my website. Letting me actually map out and keep track of what those different buying roles are that we talked about a minute ago. And something that you can't see here, but is one of my favorite things, is we can actually also see a list of people inside of our organization who are in touch with this target account, which can be really helpful to know, especially if it's a long sales process, maybe touching a lot of folks. Another quick way to reduce friction, live chat has become really popular over the past few years. In HubSpot, this lives in a tool called Conversations. Conversations lets you target people at different stages of the buyer's journey. So we could literally make lists and target prospects differently and serve them maybe, a chatbot experience versus people who are deeper into the sales process. So just another way to connect people who are at specific stages, maybe in some of those high value target accounts, with their reps really seamlessly and really quickly. So a nice small kind of delight experience. Video is also a great way to kind of meet buyer expectations. Some things are just easier to explain in video, and this lets you kind of get a quick explanation out the door without needing to book a meeting. I know our reps do this all the time if they're walking through a proposal or maybe pointing something out on our pricing page. Really easy to do in HubSpot as well. And the last thing I'll call out, many of you are probably familiar with tools like this. A meetings calendar is something that I think saves everyone time. If I'm booking a meeting with somebody in my organization, it's really easy to do. With someone outside of my organization, these meetings tools made that a lot easier. Simple thing we've done in HubSpot. Most of these tools require you to fill out a form when you're booking a meeting. If you've already met with someone and you've already gone through that step of giving your email address, we just skip you right past that. So a prospect really feels like they're working with someone inside of their own company. It's a much faster, more seamless kind of booking process, and just a small way that we're trying to reduce some of that friction. Last thing I'm going to touch on, mentioned this earlier, but really creating a culture of learning. Most managers claim they coach. Most reps would tell you that they don't get a lot of coaching. We really think addressing that starts with a manager, and there's not a ton of guidance out there on what great coaching looks like. We've tried to distill it down to a few things. We think that managers really need to get good at uncovering issues for their reps, really doing hands-on review with reps, giving them great feedback, and in the process of all of that, building trust with their teams. And again, a simple audit can kind of be helpful here, and you can get a sense of how this works. Can kind of order things here based on, worst practice of this thing to best practice of this thing. Using open-ended questions is good, but using open-ended questions and getting really good at probing beyond that is even better. So just a way to kind of score your own ability to do some of this, or work with your managers on doing it. And few things that we think can actually help with this that you'll see in a second. Ultimately, better coaching definitely is something that reps appreciate. We look at things like rep attrition as something that gets impacted there. PPR, as reps get better at every part of the sales process. And as I saw a minute ago, reps want to be coached, right? So employee NPS, employee satisfaction, definitely also shows some of the impact there. And just real quick, a few things that we do in HubSpot. This is just an example of something that we do. I think coaching uncovers new opportunities, and this is something that our own sales team came up with. They recognize that reps typically live in one of a couple of frames of mind. They're either in a reactive sort of mindset or a proactive mindset. And what you see here is a dashboard that some of our managers built to help a rep set up their day. So on the reactive side, we do things like surface key leads and pockets of opportunities that have already popped up for reps. So things like unworked leads, they're high priority leads that maybe don't have a next activity logged against them, things that they can do to react to existing demand that's already showing up in their territory. And then on the proactive side, a lot of reps, I think, reinvent the prospecting process, and they really shouldn't have to do that. So instead, we try to give reps a starting point. We give them things like previously lost deals, companies with recent funding, portals that have maybe engaged with our free product. So just kind of a neat trick that our teams are doing to help managers partner with their reps to really kind of structure their day. This one's obvious. Call transcription, recording can be great fodder for some of those deep coaching conversations. That all happens natively in HubSpot if you want it to. And I talked about playbooks a couple of minutes ago. There's a lot of use cases for these. Another one is really using them as a sales training or enablement tool. You can add videos, reminders, tips that might be specific to a particular part of the sales process that a rep needs help with. So if they're struggling on a call, or maybe in a demo and need some detail really quickly on a competitor, you can make it really easy for them to get to that detail. So that's kind of a whirlwind walkthrough of how we think about this idea of frictionless selling at HubSpot, and some of the ways that we try to kind of bake that idea and some of those best practices in our product. And as I mentioned, a lot of the resources that I stepped through are things that Trevor and the team have and are going to share afterward. So dig in, let us know if you kind of get value out of this process, and you'll have access to the deck as well. So you can kind of see some of those examples of how we do these things over time. But I think we got a good little chunk of time for Q&A, and I apologize. I know there were some questions coming in as I was going through things, but in the one monitor world, it's a little tough to see to see everything, but we can jump in right now. Yeah, so just taking a look back, and feel free to drop any questions for me in the chat pane. Some mentions, yeah, some folks who have seen that Carvana example. Yeah, Trevor had asked if anyone has used the new ABM functionality in HubSpot. That's pretty much brand new and something that we rolled out just a couple of weeks ago. Really tried to give people a prescriptive starting point for ABM. You know, I think ABM gets talked about a lot, but a lot of tools don't give you a ton of structure, and pretty much works right out of the box once your database is set up in HubSpot. Darren mentioned he finds that many salespeople sort of battle to automate because the battle is to plan where the best place is to start for a manager. You know, I think that's interesting, right? It's pretty tough to start thinking about ways to automate your process when the process maybe doesn't exist or isn't really well founded. So I think, you know, some of the things I talked about around those proactive and reactive dashboards can be an interesting starting point. I think that's like a good example of a really prescriptive place where we, at least at HubSpot, have tried to say to reps, you know, when you sit down during the day, there's kind of these two mindsets you're going to be in, these two contexts you're going to be in. Here are some starting points for how to do that. And of course, you can go really deep into planning out and figuring out what the process looks like for different parts of a rep's day-to-day. But I think that's just one example of a place where we've tried to put some of that on paper. Ali mentioned task queues are useful, but not really extensively used. You know, that is, I think, a pet rock of mine. Some of these features, task queues in particular, I think is a little tough to find and discover inside of HubSpot. But like I said a minute ago, really kind of a tool that lets you create a playlist of tasks, kind of fire through them pretty quickly, which is really nice. I said this earlier, but I think there's so much context switching built into a rep's day-to-day as they maybe move from writing emails to placing calls to, you know, fielding live chats from a website if you have live chat set up. Task queues really just try to focus you in on one type of activity and make it easy to kind of get into a flow state where you can do a lot of those things pretty quickly. But it does take a little bit of digging to find it in the product, which is something that we're working on. Yeah, Sandy had asked, like I said, we're going to share the deck and all of the resources afterward for anybody who wants to kind of get into the weeds on this stuff. You know, Tandy had asked, yeah, that is a tough one. And, you know, we could spend an awful lot of time talking about some of the different ways that we see people doing that. I mean, I think cold calling, sourcing is a big part of so many orgs' sales strategies because it can work when it's done right? But we talk a lot about the concept of inbound marketing, of finding ways, I think, further up the funnel to really make yourself findable online and in different contexts. And I think that's probably our biggest answer to how folks can actually grow a business, actually create new connections and new demand without doing things like cold calling. But there's a long list of other approaches that I think people try. But, you know, cold calling prospecting is often, you know, a default that a lot of sales teams, I think, go to, and not for bad reason.
If I can just add to that, I think that prospecting is still a vital part of the sales process. But the idea of reaching out to completely cold leads and, you know, hoping that the more that you do, the more that you might find and land somebody who's interested is becoming less and less realistic for all the reasons that you've mentioned earlier. But prospecting as a discipline on the back of a well-researched, nurtured lead is very, very important.
Yeah, I think that's really fair, right? I think the old mindset around prospecting is being, you know, a one-step process or something that's going to yield a warm sales-ready opportunity is kind of becoming less and less of a likely thing. And prospecting definitely still has a place in the process, but I think it needs to be viewed as one of many pieces in a much bigger scheme of trying to stay in front of people and build some trust over a longer period of time.
Jeff, it's Darren here. So one of the things that I'm seeing a massive increase, and you mentioned LinkedIn Sales Navigator and being able to automate. I'm getting 5 to 10 a week, if not more, people trying to sell me things on LinkedIn. And one of the things that I look at is going, what annoys me in that process, and how do I avoid doing it to other people? So how would you avoid just being that irritation in someone's inbox?
Yeah, I think that's another $1 million question. And we really talk a lot about, I mean, I think LinkedIn, and if you look at what the current state of, InMail and connection requests and the world on LinkedIn looks like, is all channels, I think, ultimately over time. If you think about email, if you think about phone calls, kind of trend toward saturation, right? And they tend to become less effective over time. But I think what you mentioned is really the right way to think about it, is not only how can you not just be another annoyance, but really starting from a place of taking a longer view and trying to think about ways that you can provide value to people. And I think that's a pretty high level thing to say, but ultimately I think that's probably the best way to sort of tailor your approach, is really have a different mindset. I get plenty of those myself too, right? And I could probably draw a line between the ones that I get that are clearly well researched, there's some context built in, maybe there's some element of a connection there that someone's playing off of, versus something that is, purely an upfront product pitch, where I can see very clearly who that connection is meant to benefit. So that's, I think, my high level guidance on that. I definitely agree with you that LinkedIn is a channel that a lot of people still have a lot of success with, but definitely, like all channels, is trending more and more in that direction over time. Yeah, and Francis mentioning received some excellent leads from LinkedIn recently. Yeah, definitely still, like I said, a channel that I think people are getting value out of, but depends a lot on the approach and the context, and probably to some extent the industry that you're in. I think being in SaaS and software, a lot of people in related spaces are pretty good at prospecting on LinkedIn. That might be true everywhere, but nice. I can just say I'm happy to be a resource to anyone who joined today. Feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn or otherwise. As Trevor mentioned, we're going to share all of the resources, but it's been great to step through everything here and have a little bit of back and forth on this stuff. I know it's an important time to be thinking about some new ways to do things a little differently, and that's kind of the goal from this talk.
Jeff, sorry, before we jump off, I see we missed one more question from Tandy. What if a certain key opportunity clients are not interacting online, or are not on our database? How do we interact with them?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and something that kind of came up at one point in here is really trying to figure out what channels people prefer to interact through, right? So you're not going to be very successful connecting with people on LinkedIn if it's clear that they don't engage and spend a lot of time there. And the same thing would go for, there are some channels that I think are pretty universal. You think about email, you think about reaching people on the phone, but I think that's really one of those fundamental things that you need to figure out early on. And a lot of that comes back to research and just understanding your buyers and understanding what's common amongst the folks who might be in the space that you sell into. So I think not knowing the industry and the specifics of the situation, I think it really probably does come down to almost some level of persona research and understanding how these folks in your space you're trying to reach typically operate, where do they spend their time, and how can you find ways to get in front of them and be valuable in those contexts.
Great. Any other questions? Anybody else? Looks like you're getting lots of compliments, Jeff, and it was a great session. Thank you. All of us got value. I certainly learned a lot, so thank you very, very much. And just for everybody, if you if you need some more assistance, you'd like to delve into any of the concepts that were chatted about at a high level and spend more time going into detail around that, please feel free to give us a call or send us a message.
Awesome. Thanks so much for putting this together, Trevor and team. This was a lot of fun.
Thanks, Jeff.
Yeah.
Thanks, Jeff. Enjoy
Thanks,
the rest
everyone.
of the day, everybody. Keep warm.
Bye.